Hello, everyone. Welcome to this episode of the Taking His Hand podcast presented by truthbooks.com. I'm Lance Taylor, the Director of Operations for Truth Publications and CEI Bookstore, and we want to welcome you to today's show. We have a special roundtable panel of guests with us today from the Sumphonia group. And this group of editors helped bring to life the Psalms, hymns, and spiritual songs Hymnal that so many of you have come to know, as well as the slide maker software that is able to be used digitally. I want to say welcome to everybody from Sumphonia that's able to join us today.
Great to be here.
Thank you so much. And I'm going to go around and just briefly introduce everyone. Your names are on the screen for those that be seeing us live, but if you're listening to this, we have with us Craig Roberts, Steve Wolfgang, David Maravilla, Matthew Bassford, and Charli or Charlotte Couchman. I think she'd rather be talked to as Charli, it seems. But we're so glad that each of these have joined us. You're listed in these hymnals as the editors. Maybe Craig, start off and tell us a little bit about what that means and how this all came to be.
Well, I don't know how it began with the publishers, but Steve Wolfgang contacted me in 2006 and asked if I would do a hymnal or consider it. And I've done a lot of book editing and writing, and so I knew right away the answer was yes and no both. And so we had to put together an editorial board, a stratified board, and set policies and style sheets and pipelines. It's quite a mess to do this from scratch. But I asked Steve, would it be all right if we brought in Sumphonia and some other editors? And he said yes, and we ended up with about 30. But frankly, that's how professional publishing happens. And so that's how it began, at least on my end.
This has been a major, as you mentioned, a major joint effort. This is not from the brains of one or two people. This has been so many involved. Steve, maybe since Craig brought you into it, I'll bring you into it as well now. Tell us a little bit about your recollection of the beginnings of this to where we've arrived now.
Well, I think you're correct, and we need to emphasize this is a group effort. It involved the input of many, many people and many man hours. I should acknowledge that Mark Colson, who's not able to be with us today, is one of the editors of the Hymnal as well, and so we don't want to omit him. But if you look at the masthead, there's as Craig said, 30 or more people, and then there are some others who are mentioned in the front matter that we give credit to. I think it arose that all of us had a sense of that we can improve our hymn worship. In my case, I'll just speak for myself, but I think some others probably share this viewpoint. It had gotten to the point where in some cases, in some instances, hymns were being sung that didn't have a lot of content, or that were designed not necessarily for worship, but for camp sorts of environments and so forth. And so Craig and the Sumphonia group were already working on writing some new hymns. So that's really the keystone to this in a lot of ways. But it doesn't do much good to have new hymns if nobody knows about them. So the idea was hatched to do a new hymnal that incorporated not only the newer hymns written by brethren that were judged to be good in a blind review. It wasn't just somebody knew somebody's uncle or cousin or whatever, but also to go back and resurrect some older hymns that I've often used this phrase had sunk to the bottom of the great lake of forgotten hymns. Either they had been overused in the past or for some reason, but they're really good praise hymns that have biblical content. They say something. I think that's the common denominator in all of this. Is we wanted to provide congregations, including elders and preachers, many of whom were on the editorial board, with a tool to enhance worship and to steer people to ask, what am I singing? Well, why are we singing these lyrics, and what do they mean? So that's my take on kind of the impetus for this hymnal. Others, I'm sure, can add to that. So I'll be quiet for a while.
Charli, maybe talk about it from your perspective. You've been involved from the get-go, and we reach out to you quite often on different questions and needs. But maybe fill in some gaps here from what Craig and Steve have said about how this came to be and your involvement in it.
Okay. Yeah, I remember the day Steve called and said, "Hey, Charli, have you ever thought about being part of putting together a new hymnal?" And I said, "No, I hadn't." And he began to present his thoughts about that. And Symphonia had begun about 3 or 4 years before that. We had gotten together a group of us to, our main purpose was to try to record hymns that we had been writing and we felt like had some good content and good music, and didn't have a place to be published or sung. So we began that group and became a nonprofit organization. And so that was our beginning in about 2002 or 3, where and as you know, we have about 8 recordings now of, they started out with new hymns. The first 2 were all new hymns. And then when the hymnal came along and we started working, it turned out that most of our recordings then were from the book. And that was a great blending of 2 efforts there.
Yeah, and Matt, I know you're listed as one of the technical editors. Maybe you can bring us in on that side of things, because not only did this hymnal come into existence, but there was some other development to make this something that could be projectable and bring in other opportunities with it too.
That's certainly true. Although I personally didn't have anything to do with it, that's not my kind of technique. There is the accompanying slide maker software that a lot of congregations around the country have used and found very beneficial to their worship. But my role in this process was I didn't make decisions about what hymns to include or exclude. They just kind of threw me in the fire wherever there was something that needed to be done. And so that was my role for several years in the midst of this process.
Well, and you talk about not your technique, but you are a songwriter yourself. I guess everybody on this Zoom today has been a part of that. But maybe talk about that as well, Matt. Is the art of songwriting to some degree, at least for those who are not familiar with it, and how that's a special group to be a part of.
It is. It's something that I've been doing for, I guess about 25 years now. And it has been one of the great joys of my spiritual life to work with these other people. And I think all of us are animated by the conviction that the Bible is the inspired word of God, and that God wants our hymns not only to make us feel good when we sing them, but he wants our hymns to glorify him for his wonderful deeds. He wants the hymns we sing to be useful in teaching one another. And so it's from that perspective of making sure that there is spiritually beneficial content to our worship that all of us have been writing. And just the other day, I happened to go through psalms, hymns, and spiritual songs cover to cover, looking at every hymn. And one of the impressive things to me about it, as somebody who didn't make all those determinations about table of contents, is just how many solid hymns there are in it. That if you want to, you can make a really content light, not useful worship service from psalms, hymns, and spiritual songs, but you have to work at it. That usually anybody who is desiring to have really edifying, God-pleasing worship, that they'll find what they need within the covers of that hymn.
Yeah, absolutely. And for those who are maybe not familiar, this is what the actual hardback book looks like. I've been trying to share some screens as these folks here from Symphonia talk to let you see some places where you can go find some more information. But for 850 hymns, it's nice and thin, printed on excellent paper in this hardback copy. We also have the flex case edition for song leaders, especially, or from teaching from, that's really, really nice, or just as a collector's edition. Shift gears just a little bit. David, I bring you into this, and I think you've been heavily involved in handling some of the workings of the recordings and facilitating some of that. I know everybody has been, but maybe you can talk to us a little bit about that work in particular, because that's a big piece of this too, to let people know about these songs, how to sing them when they're not as familiar with them, and also just bringing the knowledge of what's in the hymnal as well.
Right. What I do is I have to ship all the CDs. That's my job. That's what I end up doing. No, we're all involved in the recording. And as Charlie said, the last, I don't know how many CDs have, since the hymnal's been published, we've tried to focus on hymns that aren't familiar, that aren't in most hymnals that Churches of Christ use. Some of those that Steve talked about that were resurrected or that people didn't know for various reasons. And so that's been helpful, helping people learn things that are new to them. There's certainly not all new songs that we're talking about, but new to our brethren. And the current CD that we're working on sort of goes back to the first two CDs that we made. I don't even, others can remember the timing of all this better than I, but they're made almost exclusively of hymns that are written by brethren that are new, or relatively new, that aren't published in hymnals. And so, and that's how we, as Charlie explained, we started Sumphonia to give an outlet to brethren who are writing hymns, an outlet for those hymns to be sung and potentially published. And so this latest CD is back to that.
Well, I know the recordings have certainly been a hit from a standpoint of running the bookstore here and truthbooks.com and seeing those who reach out, and we have such a following of people that are always interested in, when's the next recording going to be, and those kind of things. I know that they're available obviously here at your website, symphonia.com. They're also available at truthbooks.com. Maybe talk a little bit about the donate side of this. I know you guys are established as a nonprofit organization. We are familiar with that at Truth Publications as well as a nonprofit organization, but maybe talk a little bit about that. I don't know which one of you would be the best spokesman for that. I'll let y'all point fingers at each other, but somebody maybe share a little bit about why somebody might want to contribute to the work that you guys are doing.
I'll volunteer.
All right.
That I get the brass ring there. But for those of you who aren't familiar, what a 501c3 corporation is, it's an organization that is nonprofit, that it is not designed to make anybody any money. It is just to promote some particular cause. And in our case, none of us are salaried, none of us get a stipend from Sumphonia. So every dime that anybody contributes to Sumphonia goes straight to promoting the cause of a cappella worship, straight to promoting hymns that are the best and most spiritually useful. And so anybody who believes in those things, I think we're an obvious target for donations, because you look at those ratings of nonprofits online, and such and such, so only 75% of what they donate goes to actually the cause that they claim to be promoting. But in our case, everything that you give will be put toward a work of eternal significance.
I think that is really key. I think folks have to know that on the nonprofit side, we're a little bit of a strange one with Truth Publications and CEI Bookstore, because we are fully a nonprofit organization, but since we are running a retail operation, there are different kind of departments of what we do. But we keep a very strict accounting record of how the donations and such come in, even to us, and how that's earmarked and allocated specifically for the use of publications. So it's really the same kind of mentality that we have. Obviously, we have to pay our staff that runs the bookstore. But as far as anything going, stipends or anything else to board of directors or any other leadership involvement, that does not happen. So it's just one of those things where I think a lot of maybe good Christian people out there might not even be aware that there are opportunities like this to contribute to organizations that are really trying to do a good work in getting a cappella music out there, or in our case, Christian publications out there as a whole. So very excited about that.
Yeah, I would just add to what Matt said and make the point that a lot of the Sumphonia board members contribute their own money. And when we were first getting going, we even had to rob our kids' college funds to get this going. And we operate basically on rubber bands and paper clips. We're not interested in money. We're not interested in anything but getting this work done. And we sort of take the posture, the Lord will provide, and he seems to. We go ahead with the work and people come through. And sometimes that's us, but many times it's others, and we're always thankful, and we depend on that.
That's a great point. Go ahead, Steve.
Since I'm a historian, can I take us back a little bit, change the subject to the hymnal? One of the things that happened, because we had these wonderful hymns that had come out of the Symphonia workshop that, as Charlie said, were recorded on the first 2 CDs. And I think eventually all except one of those perhaps actually was in the hymnal once the hymnal was published, a high percentage of them anyway. But it's one thing to have really good hymns, and it fulfills a creative impulse and so forth, but we want people to sing it. I mean, kind of the point of the activity is we want to enhance the worship of God by singing these wonderful hymns that have biblical content and edify other Christians, and don't just use cliches that have been, recycled over and over again. So one of the things that we did that's unique to this hymnal, I think, is we put up a collation of all of the indices, all the indexes of the 8 most sold hymnals among churches of Christ in the 20th century. 1,836 discrete hymns out of those 8, which tells you one thing right up front, that half of them are not going to make it in a hymnal, and a high percentage of them were in only one of those hymnals. The other 7 said, nope, not in my hymnal. But we let people log on and basically tell us, what do you want in the hymnal? And so we worked out a sort of, we collected some metadata, but we also had a ranking of 0 to 5, 0 being, I don't know this hymn, which is useful information. 1 was definitely do not include. I've said before, I think I originally said that ought to read, this hymn should never have been written, but the other editors had better sense than I, and so we changed that all the way up to 5, which is you must include this hymn in this hymnal. And we harvested 550 that scored 4.3 or higher, which is to say that these are all commonly known hymns. You'd have to be under a rock somewhere for the last 30 years not to know these hymns that have been sung over and over and over again. Not just in churches of Christ, but a big chunk of them in any church, any hymnal you want to name. And then that gave us the possibility of including another 300 lesser known hymns, either the new hymns that we've talked about that are being written by brethren, or new hymns from, for example, the New English Renaissance, the hymn explosion that would include people like Getty and Townend, are known for In Christ Alone, or a whole collection of hymns like that, Ruth Duck, Fred Pratt Green. I mean, there are a lot of people, Brian Wren, there's a whole list of names, but also some older hymns that we mentioned. So what this hymnal is a blend of both old and new that are the best in their genre. I mean, we have modern contemporary hymns, we have old high church hymns, we have gospel hymns, we have Southern gospel kind of quartet hymns. We don't object to that. We just don't want to sing. I don't want to sing 6 or 8 of them in a row in a worship service. And so what this hymnal is, and what Symphonia contributed to, not only in the writing of new hymns and then the recording of them, because it's one thing to have a recording, but we want people to sing these. And so they went into the hymnal and to the PowerPoint so that whatever a church does in doing, I mean, we use the PowerPoint where I preach in the Chicago area, but people are still going to be using print hymnals for a long time to come. Some of the others may want to comment on this, so I'll be quiet for a while.
Well, I would definitely want to, especially on that last point you made, that hymnals are still going to be useful. You know, that's one of the questions that comes up, I think, especially maybe among some of the younger generation or the more digitally savvy generation. If so much of this is projectable and digital, then why, even have a print hymnal? And we were discussing before we even began the recording today, that very thing. So I'd like to hear from more of you about that specific thing, because y'all all brought out some really great thoughts and points, and some of it very practical, some of it also very personal, but I think all of it very relevant to why we still need the print hymnal.
Well,
I think one of the things that it does is that it is very useful to have oversight over the body of hymns that are sung in worship. And here's what I mean by that. In the modern era, when you have congregations with slide decks filled with hymns from whatever source, basically the only barrier to bringing a hymn into the Sunday morning assembly is sort of the whimsy of the song leader. And some of those are very good. Some of them, well, I mean, I know a brother who literally walked out of the assembly because one of these sort of free range hymns was so bad. And, the beauty of having a hymnal where the core is, okay, these are the hymns that the Lord's people want to sing in worship, is rather than just being, the exercise of the song leader's desire. We know that these are things that people want to sing. We know these work in worship. These are tried and tested. And it means that every Sunday that is using that body of hymns is going to be a solid worship experience.
I believe
Go
some
ahead,
of
Dave.
us,
Go
I'm
ahead, and I'll
positive,
Go ahead.
I'm going, that some of us see the advantage of seeing more than 2 lines at a time of what we're using in song worship. It helps. I think maybe people who read a lot read ahead more than we think we do. And it's easier to grasp the meaning. And we project him sometimes, but if it's something that we know, I prefer just having the words up there if people know the music, because then you could see the whole verse up there.
Yeah.
And it's not even obstructed by the music. And there's some advantage to having a whole verse there with no music. And that's not gonna change unless we can get more music on a screen where everybody gets, more content on the screen. We're just seeing 2 lines at a time.
Right. So I would follow that exact point. And last Sunday, for example, I led Take Time to Be Holy, which is the Lord's to-do list. And it's words only. Take time to be holy. Be calm in your soul. Speak oft with the Lord, and put it up there with words only. But we do have new Christians. We have people who are not familiar with the tune. So I announced the page number so they could follow along in the music if they were unfamiliar. But I agree with David that sometimes the music is actually a physical and a mental obstacle to getting that point. We got to get that point inside of us. That's really where the feeling comes from, is that message. And so, that's one of the underexploited techniques, is just put the words up. Let people who know the hymn sing it. Let those who don't check out the hymnal.
Yeah, go ahead, David.
Well, we've done that, for example, in hymn writing class, even with words, with the hymn or the words only, in even more creative ways, like take time to be holy, colon, and then put bullets, speak off with your Lord, abide in him always, feed on his word. And the hymnal itself is an example of the way things appear on the page can help the meaning. That's why we have sentences and periods and paragraphs, but there's a lot more to it than that.
Yeah, I want to come back to that in a second, because the phrase notation, I think we need to make sure people understand that. But I kind of wanted to shift to Steve, and I don't want to leave Charli out either. But Steve, you had mentioned before that not every congregation is set up in such a way as to do everything digital, and that makes a big difference on the availability of hymnals like this too.
Yeah, this came up in a couple of recent historical sessions where we were talking about hymnals. I mean, it works. I'm fine with projection myself. It has advantages. It gets people's eyes up out of the book and up, looking and thinking about what's going on in the worship. But many congregations are not set up for that. I mean, I've seen places where, for instance, architecturally, it just you can't hardly project. But one of the main impediments, Matt raised this point in the past, I've kind of borrowed it from him, but in order to have a small congregation, say, you got to have 3 or 4 anyway, probably people who are trained to be able to run the software to project, because you got to do this every Sunday, every Wednesday night, every time the church meets for gospel meeting. If you've got, 2 guys sick and 1 guy on vacation, you got nobody to run the projector or, to load the hymns. I don't mean just run the projector, but to operate the software, which is fairly simple. I mean, people have commented on how simple and easy to use our software is, but it still takes somebody there advancing the hymns, and some congregations simply can't field that manpower, or the bulb goes out, or they have a baptism and their screen is down over the baptistry. So the screen has to go up in order for people to see what's going on. I've seen all of that happen. And, bulb blows up, people are pulling hymnals out of the rack. So I think there's always going to be a use for hymnals, and a good reason to use them, as David was talking about, so that you can see what the entire hymn or this entire verse is about, rather than just a couple of snippets of it. Charli, you want to add to that?
Yeah.
I didn't have a whole lot to add to that. All of, power outages and impromptu songs, sometimes that happens where somebody wants to lead an extra song. So if the technician's not really quick, then pull out the books.
Yeah, and I would add to that too, that you've got, going back to something that Matt said earlier, that I wanted to also make sure I followed up on, the control factor of it, but not only the control factor of it, of like the elders, the leaders of the church, knowing what is going to be the base of these songs, where they're coming from. But then also, if you're planning a worship service and a preacher says, hey, I'm going to be speaking on this, it's a little hard to sort through software for sure to see everything available on that topic, or that would filter into that. But with the index of hymns that's available with psalms, hymns, and spiritual songs, you can so easily, I'm going to share this real quick, but by topic, it's so well laid out for us as a song leader resource to be able to look at it not only by topic, but then I'm going to scroll kind of quickly past this, because then there's also an index of titles and first lines, which also brings a whole other way of searching and looking for that content that you're trying to find for the worship assembly. There's index of tunes and so forth, and there's different ways to utilize that as well. But I just kind of wanted folks to see that this is a resource that's extremely useful because of the way that it's been built in this way too, and that makes the print so valuable compared to just the software alone.
Well, Lance, on that, Craig, talk a little bit about the metrical index, which is one of the unique features of this hymnal. There are not many other hymnals that do something like this, certainly not among churches of Christ. And it has to do with the metering of hymns and things that are emphasized in the Symphonia workshop. So Craig, that's your bailiwick. Why don't you talk about that for a minute?
Yeah, and I could actually talk about these 2 points if I could share the screen, Lance.
Oh,
I'm not sure I'm enabled.
yeah,
to.
let me give you that ability.
But I could show you exactly how the metrical index works, and at the same time talk about words only. Now, we should know, take time to be holy. Most of our members do, but we have, if we're doing the job we're supposed to be in evangelism, we've got some people who don't know it. So there, I give them the page number, and then we began singing, and it comes across like this: take time to be holy. So here's the list. You go on to the second verse. Here are some more things we do. Then we switch over to yield not to temptation, which is right in line, the same meter, the same topic. So you sing this verse, then you come back and close with this one. That sort of thing is hard to do if they're staring into the book and they can't flip pages. It's a little bit of a kind of a non-fuss medley. And so those are some of the things we can do. And as Steve said, this hymnal has an index of hymn meters, not tune names. And so that's another topic, but we have in the hymnal 9 what are called composite hymns. So these are hymns with the same topic and the same theme, and they're just, some of the stanzas are grouped together. And I think David or somebody could talk about that a little better than I could. But let me tell you the reason for this in my mind. It isn't to have another gimmick or another feature. This hymnal has a lot of unique features, but it's really to refresh some of the messages. If we sing the same message with the same music, and we do it a lot, that message loses its effectiveness. This is a way to repackage. And so I'll yield to someone else who can talk about composite hymns. David has looked at that quite a bit.
Can I jump in on the metrical index too? Another thing that does is it lets you sing other texts to tunes that you already know. And for instance, I think it's probably true that O Sacred Head has the most difficult music of anything that we sing in the churches of Christ. It's beautiful, but it's hard. Maybe you're in a congregation of 30 people and you can't manage that music because you don't have all the parts. What you can do though, since if you look it up in the metrical index, you will see that it's a hymn in 7676 doubled. It's coming, I think. There it is. It's number 224 there. But you can look through that index, everything with that 7676 doubled, and look for a tune that you do know. For instance, we might know I Love to Tell the Story. And because we know that tune and can sing that tune, now we can bring in the words to O Sacred Head, which are really good, and sing those words to that tune.
That's a great point. I've been now, since being involved in this work here for the last 5+ years, I've been privy to some opportunities where this has been utilized really well. And that is really an amazing thing to be like, hey, look at the words to this, to a familiar tune. And now, it all works, and that's just fantastic when we can do that. And the tools are here. I know Craig used the idea, it's not like a gimmick or but it's really not. This is high level understanding of music that is needed, maybe especially in the churches of Christ, and especially where a cappella music is loved and appreciated, to be able to utilize things like this and to broaden the ability of a small group or a large group, to worship well and to worship in a way that's meaningful and new in a sense, and that you're kind of refreshing through the use of these different tools.
Can I mention one other thing, and we can always circle back and pick up anything, but even the way the hymnal is laid out and organized, it begins, it's called, of course, called Psalms, Hymns, and Spiritual Songs, which of course is borrowed from New Testament texts like Ephesians 5 and Colossians, but was also the title of Alexander Campbell's dominant hymnal in the 19th century. So we grabbed it since nobody had used it since then. But it starts with Psalms or Psalm derivatives, and then moves to a whole section of praise hymns. I mean, this hymnal is about praising God, among other things, edifying Christians. And then it has a section, the biography of Christ, if you will, or the chronology of his life, where we put in hymns where people can sing about the birth of Christ, or his ministry and his teaching, his death and burial and resurrection, his ascension. All of those are sequenced in that order, so that you have a section there about the life of Christ. And then, and only then, after the Psalms and the praise of God and the focus on the life of Jesus Christ, do we get to songs about salvation and the church and the Christian life and faithfulness, and then ends with hymns of invitation. So rather than just sort of throwing the hymns in a sort of a helter-skelter way, like I've looked at a lot of hymnals in the past and wondered why are they organized this way, or it doesn't seem that they have any kind of organization. Whereas what we tried to do here was to bring some logical order to this. And somebody else may want to talk about something else or comment more about that.
David, you were alluded to earlier, but you didn't
Yeah.
quite take the stage, so we'll turn it to you if you'd like to comment.
I wasn't fast enough. Back to the metrical index. We're not used to those in Churches of Christ, but it's not an unusual thing in hymnals. And Steve and others could know more about this than I do, but the hillbilly version I can give, that's sort of leftovers from the time when people, even when hymnals did not have music, they knew some tunes. And so how many, whatever meter it was in would determine which tune they sung it. And so it's sort of evolved from that. Ours is not just like traditional ones, but it's not only not a gimmick, it's not unusual at all. It looks new to people in Churches of Christ, and a lot of people, it would do well to understand more about that and put it to use like we've been talking about. But
yeah, that's a great point. That it really is in a lot of ways it's old school, but brought into a new format and maybe more useful resource as far as being able to understand it. I wanted to go back to the phrase notation just for a moment to be sure people understand that. That's actually printed on the very front of the book, and we get a lot of questions about that as to what that means. I want to share my screen again just to show an example of this that I think will register with folks. But for instance, on this number 62, praise the Lord, ye heavens adore him. When you first look at this, you see a whole lot of white space on this page. That might be what kind of jumps out at you. But the reason for that is because of the phrase notation. And that's what it is the phrase ends, and that's where this portion ends. And that happens down through the song. I'd like to hear you guys talk about that. And the importance of that and the difference that makes. And then I'd also like to talk about it in view of the software, because the same thing is the case for SlideMaker. And I have especially noticed the difference in how that is singable, if you will, versus the competition out there who puts a dash there and you're in mid-word and also switching slides. Which is a very, very awkward thing. But I'd like to hear you guys talk about that.
I would like to talk about that if you don't mind. I'd
Yes.
also like to share my screen again if you don't mind.
Don't mind at all.
Why would we put up with this? This is my old King James Bible that my father bought me in 1963. We see this now and we think, why would people do that? We see this, we think, well, this is the normal thing. This is the New American Standard of Psalm 2. You can see in the old layout, King James Version is not really simply an archaic translation or an archaic version. It's an archaic layout. And you see here all these couplets. No one who writes poetry would think about doing something like this, putting couplets and phrases into paragraphs. You lose, some ways, the point. But if we look at the New American Standard, here's Psalm 2. If you look at the ESV, and so now what's normal is phrase notation throughout all the Old Testament books of poetry. We can even get into 1 Timothy 3 and some passages that our scholars tell us were hymns. So phrase notation should be the norm. And but it's there because we think what we see. And that's a whole other subdiscipline.
I had someone approach me not long ago, probably a couple of months ago, and said, hey, I wanted to talk to you about the hymnal and tell you how much I love the phrase notation. He said, I never thought about it. He was a song leader. And after singing from the book and then going back to another book, and he said, I missed it. And it just makes so much sense.
Right. And that, I mean, because the lines break when there's a break, and you don't have capital letters in the middle of a line, unless it's there are two lines in that particular line. Everything makes more sense. And every once in a while, somebody will claim that we wasted a lot of paper with all that white space. First of all, are those Bibles wasting paper because they're phrasing that? That's my first point.
Yeah.
And and I have it somewhere. I don't have it here to share my screen, but we did a lot of comparison with other hymnals. We called it hymn density. How many hymns in the first 100 pages? And ours was, because we're getting more syllables across in one line. It was, right in there with other hymnals. It wasn't the least or the most, but it was just average. And
yeah, and so I would add to that. And one of the things that publishers tell you is white space is not white space. It's there for a reason. And so layout is, I don't know why hymnals are laid out the way they are. It's just so odd when you look at other books. But the other thing is, these other hymnals have wasted a lot of white space if we have. If you look at the way their approach, and it's normal, I'm not trying to criticize, they're following standard conventional layout for hymnals, but they'll simply put a staff up here, then a bunch of white space, then another staff, then a lot of white space. And so they spread it out anyway. And you can imagine a poetry book, if they did that, tried to fill the page that way, or even Psalm 2. The other thing I would say about phrase notation is for song leaders. When you're song leading, and if you're leading from the book, you always know where you are. You take a breath, you know where the next line is. You're not trying to trace the hymn with your finger so you can look up and then, oh, here I am again. And that's true as well in the PowerPoint version. You take a breath, there's a slide transition. You take a breath. So, this is the normal way. It may look like it's not, but it is the normal way in other layout.
And I don't know that anybody has said it right out, but the point is, it makes all these hymns easier to understand, because now the lines are breaking where the thought concludes, and you move on to the next line only when you were moving on to another thought, as opposed to like that KJV that Craig had up on the screen. Why are the nations in an uproar, and the what? It creates confusion. And especially if you're going through a whole worship service that way, the confusion only accumulates, it snowballs. That we're like taping 5-pound weights around our ankles and going for a run when we're not using phrase notation.
The influence of Bible publishing on this hymnal, I think, is remarkable, and we have adopted a lot of the protocols of Bible publishing. David, talk for a minute about Lord and Yahweh and why some of them appear capitalized as they do in Bibles. I mean, this hymnal uses the same protocol as a lot of the Bibles that will capitalize the name of God. But you know more about that than anybody, I think, in this group probably.
Well, I don't know if I know about why it's like that in our Bibles more than anybody else, but I know why it's in the hymnal, and we went through it and tried to make decisions on whether this Lord is Yahweh in the hymnal, or is it just Lord, the word meaning master. But yeah, we're just trying to, Bibles do that for a reason. I mean, in my opinion, it would be better if they just put Yahweh in there. That would clarify any. But all those times that Lord is capitalized, it's unfortunate how many brethren don't even understand what that means. That doesn't mean he's the master. That's his name. And it, in some passages, you can't understand those passages unless you understand that. So we're just copying what our English translations do in the hymnal, so we can distinguish when are we addressing the Lord, or are we using his name here when we're singing, or are we addressing him as our master?
Yeah, I think that's a great point, because, when we're opening a Bible to study, we are there to learn and digest that and understand it, apply it. And that can get lost in the singing worship, the musical worship, in that we are also to be teaching and admonishing one another. We're to be singing with the understanding. We're to be knowing what we're doing, and be able to understand what we're singing. I wonder just how many have grown up singing songs and not understood what it means to raise your Ebenezer, or something like that. And that knowledge part is so important, and the way it's written and laid out plays into all of that. And we understand that with the Bible. And I think what I'm getting from this group is we should understand that with a hymnal as well. And this hymnal in particular does that. I wanted to shift gears just for a moment and go to the slide maker. It's extremely easy to use. The congregation where I'm at, we adopted it a couple of years ago, and it's been really a welcome thing for us. We're not a large group, so we don't use it all the time. We still use the print hymnals as well quite often, but it's super easy for us to use. And I kind of wanted to let you guys talk through that. I don't know who would be the best one to talk about it, but I'm going to share my screen and just show right here live, like how easy it really is to use. But when you go to the interface, you've just simply got a search bar. And if I just want to put in, a number, whatever it may be, then obviously I can do that right there and simply hit enter, and there it is. I've got options right there to include or not include, to eliminate verses. If I didn't get the right thing, it's very easy to take it off. But I can also search by name. So if I just put a O there, or if I wanted to guide me, there it is, searching it that way as well. And then as we keep going, you just simply add to it. It's not complicated at all to build then your PowerPoint or your HTML full screen mode, either one. So just maybe one of you guys chime in and talk about this. Is there something that you feel like folks need to understand just about the interface and how easy it is to use?
Yeah,
Quickly, while you have it up, just hover over one of those numbers. The verse number, and you get the verse.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And so that would be a great way to decide, if you want to include verses 1 and 2, if that fits the theme of the service better than all of them. Yeah.
So I would add this to everything that was said. The PowerPoint version, if we call it that, that was really developed with Ed Holder. Ed had some help with some HTML text from Dan Watt, from Adam Cooper. But I remember when we all talked about this and we said, look, we would like this to be so intuitive that it doesn't need instructions. It doesn't even need a 5x7 index card. It downloads, you click on it, it does everything you think it's going to do. And if you saw how he did that just now, at the bottom it says PowerPoint. And when you click on it, it makes, and look how that's phrased, by the way. But and let's also give a shout out to Tackett, who helped us with the fonts on this. And Charli can talk more about that. I didn't follow that as much.
Yeah, James Tackett, who owns the paperless hymnal, he was very kind and sent me his protocol for laying out these hymns. It turns out I kind of used a couple of preliminary points and then kind of made up my own. But that was so helpful for him to show me. He sent like a 2 or 3 page document, a Word document that laid it all out and got us going. So, and the font that was used, just how to convert it from a Finale file inside Finale to this formatting.
Yeah, I might, while I've got this pulled up here, show you, talking about just how easy it is. If you're a smaller congregation even, and you just want one continuous PowerPoint through the service, it's very easy as well to have your preacher's PowerPoint, if you will, or class teacher's PowerPoint, and just come into the PowerPoint and drop it in, paste it right in, keep its own source formatting, and there it is. It's all in one presentation, for you to roll with. That's one of the features I like about it for our use in our small congregation. It's just real easy to put it all simply into one thing and keep it all together. I liked what Craig said about the point was to where you don't even need instructions. The most instruction that customers need is how to get it downloaded. It's just that process of, okay, what do I do with my download link and how do I get the download? But other than that, we really don't field any questions about how to use it. And that's, I think, a testament to just how simple the slide maker really, really is.
May I say more about that slide maker?
Yes.
A couple of things that we didn't look at the search options. A song leader or whoever can search for words, can search for phrases. It's like a supercharged topical index that's instant. And it's, I don't keep up with competition or whoever's doing that, but hold mouse over search in the menu or click search in the menu. The menu tab, and see, you can choose from a phrase or words. If you choose words and you type in a word like kind, you will get kindness. You will get all forms of words that have kind. If you just want the specific word, then you search for a phrase, and it can be kindness and love. Anyway, we could talk about that for a long time, but that, for people who understand how to do that, is invaluable. Also, I keep getting questions about, we got a new computer. Can we just copy this to a new computer? I may hear that more because I answer email to Sumphonia, and people don't realize this is a site license, that when a church purchases this, anybody in the church can put it on his or her computer. And I don't know if everybody does that. A lot of people think they have to go to the church building to work the software for their hymnal. This is not like that. And I think at least that surprises people. So, that's something that people need to understand.
Yeah. So imagine if you have 3 or 4 song leaders or more in a congregation, all of them could have their own copy on their own computer at home. So they have the ability to search these hymns and prepare a hymn service that actually, I mean, it will get song leaders more involved rather than just stacking hymns and, searching through the book at the last minute. They can actually be involved in, putting together a service that maybe sequences from one to the other. And Lance, if you've put up a couple of more, I mean, if you're setting up a service and I want these 3 or 4 hymns, but then later you say, oh, I want to put this one in. I mean, it's fairly easy to do that. You just grab the bar and slide it up or down, or you can insert a hymn. And as you said earlier, you can either eliminate some of the verses or say, we're going to sing the chorus only at the end or only after verses 2 and 4. I mean, it's very easy to move all of that around. It's not complicated at all. And as several have said, it's very intuitive.
A couple
Yeah.
more thoughts, if I may.
Go ahead.
Concerning the licensing, another feature of the slide maker is that if that's all a congregation is using, they do not need to pay money every month to CCLI, because all the royalties have already been paid to the copyright holders and all that legal stuff has been taken care of, so you don't have to fool with it. Also, I think in terms of ease of use, it's important to compare this to the way that, just the folder on your computer full of random hymns might work, because you have to go look through that manually. You have to copy and paste and do a slide presentation. You have to manually remove verses that you don't want. And if you accidentally leave the chorus in, then everybody's confused. It's simply a much more streamlined process to use the slide maker that leads to a much more streamlined worship service.
That's a great point. Yeah. And go ahead, Craig.
Yeah, I would also say that David pointed out the pull down menu under search and the search options. And there is an author option. You can search by author.
Mm-hmm.
When we were putting the hymnal together, we tried to not highlight authors. And some people said, hey, you don't have a way for us to search by author. Well, that was intentional because we didn't want to, I guess, highlight ourselves. And even though all of the hymns that were selected by what we call the Brotherhood, recent authors, even though all those hymns went through a double-blind review, and you had a pretty objective ranking, and all of the good old boy processes were removed, still I feel like, and the others feel like, we just didn't want a hymnal that had all of us listed in the index. But at the same time, we felt like it might be of interest to people who are looking for a certain hymn and they know this author wrote it.
Mm-hmm.
Might be a nice feature for them. So it's all tucked away in the digital version.
Very good point. So you guys have just filled us with all kinds of information on this. We could go on and on and on. You guys know this backward and forward, and hopefully maybe we can even do this some more down the road and continue to share it. But what I want to do in our kind of closing moments is I just want to really ask each of you one question, and you give me your elevator speech. We're going from the lobby to the 4th floor. What do you tell me if I say, why this hymnal?
Yeah. I tell them it is the hymnal version of the New American Standard. In other words, it's phrased that way. As David said, Lord in all caps is Yahweh. It's clean, light, modern, and very thorough. So, the Bible is to teach, and I think that and hymns are, but I believe also the hymnal itself is to teach. And so I look at this as, it's not the inspired word, but since I'm almost on the 4th floor, I'll stop. I think it is as close as possible that we can get to a Bible-looking hymnal.
It's great.
My elevator speech is that I think that this hymnal will do a really good job of helping your people get to heaven. because the quality of the hymns in it is so strong. And we all know that the hymns we sing are the Bible we carry around in our heads. We don't memorize scriptures very well, but we memorize hundreds of hymns. And these strong quality hymns are the hymns that they are carrying with them every day, that are helping them pray, that are helping them wrestle with temptation. That good hymns make an eternal difference. And that's why this is a good hymn.
Charli?
I would say that the content is so rich, and the music is in most cases very beautiful and very fitting to the text. And that to me is very important. One thing I tell, especially, I guess women in particular like devotionals, to do their daily devotionals. I think a hymnal is a wonderful way of doing a daily devotional. If you take this hymnal and make it, just read from it aloud if possible. And then I've taught a women's class where we actually went through the words and talked about phrases and imagery and all kinds of things, but text from the Bible, references, and then we would sing the hymns. But you can do that in your daily Bible study. And this is a great hymnal to do that from.
David?
Mine's sort of maybe the third floor version of what Matt said. I just believe it'll help a church's song worship in ways they may not even realize because of the phrase notation. And if they know more, the metrical index. I mean, it's just one thing on top of another. It's full of bonuses. But as Charli said, it's the content that's the main thing. But the way that content is presented and the helps that are with it, those are just bonuses, added bonuses.
Okay.
My favorite kind.
Steve?
This is a hymnal that's designed to unite a congregation, the people of God, in the worship of Almighty God. Its content is strong, as has been mentioned, from hymns that are old and have spoken to and expressed the desires of Christians for generations. It has all of the different kind of features that we've talked about, all of which are designed to take old or new hymns, contemporary, even hymns that have been written in the last few years, and because of the phrasing and the content, to allow them to sing together and worship God. And perhaps we should add that this, as we say in the front matter, that this was a hymn that we pray will help generations even unborn. This hymnal has a lot of songs about prayer in it, and it was put together and edited with prayer. And it is our desire that it will be an aid, a means by which Christians can worship God and unite their hearts and minds and voices in song.
Well, I truly appreciate all of your work and being willingness to share and talk about it. I do want to kind of give the commercial version of this to some degree. The hymnal is readily available for purchase, truthbooks.com, inside CEI bookstore. You can call us 256-232-0565. Our staff will be glad to answer questions, help you get set up, get started with it. We quite often work very closely with elders, deacons, song leaders, ministers alike to bring this to their congregation and help them work through the logistics of that. But the CDs are also available, and I know there's other potential media coming down the road from Sumphonia. We're looking forward to that. But we stand here to help with that. That's at Truth Publications, our tagline, taking his hand, helping each other home. And we could not more wholeheartedly recommend a product than we do Psalms, Hymns, and Spiritual Songs for that very reason. It truly is something that we believe you can lay alongside your Bible, the Word of God, put into your worship entirely, and it be truly a tool to help us on that path home. And just really want to thank you guys for being a part of this. Taking time out of your day to share the story. share the information with our audience, and to share this good work. It's just an excellent work that's been done, and we are very, very appreciative for it.
Thank you, Lance.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Lance.
Thank you
Yeah.
for your time, brother.
Glad to be
Thank
with
you. To all of you out there, thanks for joining us again. We hope that you'll stay tuned for more episodes and more times like this when we try to reach out and share good information about products and people involved in our industry. We'd like to hear from you as well. If there's somebody that you would like to see join us, if there's a topic you'd like to see covered, you could email us at podcast@truthbooks.com. Until next time that we see you, we hope that you'll continue taking God's hand as we help each other toward our heavenly home.